Thanks for joining us. My name is Dr. James Lombella, and I'm the CEO President for Connecticut for Animals Education Fund. This evening, we are going to talk about crafting testimony and how important your words are. What we're going to cover this evening, real quickly, is we're going to do an introduction quickly to Connecticut for Animals Education Fund, how you can get involved, and then we're going to jump right into our guest speaker presentation. We have a lot of material to cover, two great speakers with us this evening. At the end, we will have a wrap-up Q&A session as time permits, and a couple quick little housekeeping things to go over this evening. When you first joined, please mute your microphone if it wasn't already muted. The webinar is also being recorded, and it will be available on our website and our social media channels as well. We ask that you review it, share it, and get it out there for everyone to see the education we're bringing you this evening. There is a Q&A button to load at the bottom of the screen. So if you have any questions, please throughout the presentation this evening, load those Q&A questions right in the Q&A button, and we will go ahead and review those at the end of the presentation as time permits. And the final thing I do ask this evening is please share the education, what you learned this evening, pass it forward, share it with your friends, your neighbors, your family, etc. Share it for the animals. Connecticut for Animals vision. Connecticut for Animals Education Fund strives to cultivate a compassionate society where animals are valued and their rights are respected, fostering a culture of empathy and responsibility towards all living beings. Check out our website, ctforanimals.org, where you'll learn how we empower, we educate, we engage, and we collaborate with other organizations. How you can get involved, again, on our website, you'll find everything from advocacy links. You'll find a full educational library, which I'll show you in just a second. How you can engage, and we also have a partners page. You can check out our last newsletters. We send out newsletters periodically that are full of information and education. And you'll also find our events where we're set up in the community and where we're hosting our next educational event or online webinar. Here's that section right here, volunteer, how to work with us, join us so you get our newsletters and you get all the information about our webinars coming out. Here's the section where this evening's webinar will be loaded. When you go to our website, you click on the educational video library. You can see the video library we've already have in there. You can watch everything from understanding animal cruelty in Connecticut. We just had a great one about the truth about black bears and peaceful coexistence, saving our pollinators, and of course, SGARs and the poisons that are killing our beautiful hawks and owls and fox and wildlife, and we're contaminating the food stream. So please check out our other webinars. They're there, they're educational, and share them with your friends and family. Here's the educational library. When you first get in there, you'll click and you can see all the different topics from the rodenticides to Canadian geese roundups to our pollinators to beavers, dogfighting here in Connecticut. When you click on one of these, the next slide, if you click on rodenticide up there, this is what you find. You dive into another layer of all kinds of educational resources, fact sheets, webinars, and educational information. Here's just an example on rodenticides, and here's a fact sheet with all of the fact sheet information. And also our fact sheets are updated with any legislation. As you can see there, the 2025 legislation, which changed for rodenticides. So again, here's where you're going to learn tonight about crafting testimony. Here's where you find some of the resources that back up your position and what you want to share. So dive into the educational resources. They're here to support you. They're here to educate all of us and absolutely towards peaceful coexistence with all of our animals and wildlife. This evening, just want to talk real briefly. This is something I'm very excited about. One of the things in higher education, I've had many opportunities to stand before the Appropriations Committee, the Higher Educations Committee, presenting everything from affirmative action plans to budgets. Really, one of the biggest skills that I want to share with you this evening is truly listen. Start off listening to your opponents, understand what the other's point of view is. It's so important that you truly put on those listening ears. And one of the things I always tell people is try to find out where that common piece of information is, or the commonality. Oftentimes, when you look at a debate or an issue, there are parts that both parties agree upon. If you can find that common thread first, identify those, it puts both individuals in the frame of mind of realizing that we only have some pieces that we may need to work on. It's not the whole equation here. So that's something that I really tell folks, seek the common ground first. It's not always 100% misalignment. find where you agree upon, and then the common ground, open minds for folks and so forth. So this evening, we're going to talk about that. Words really do matter. Language isn't just neutral, it shapes what we value, accept, and justify. And words can unintentionally frame animals as threats or resources rather than sentient beings. Here's a couple examples. And if you really think about the way we talk about our issues, when we say something as simple as stray cats, it makes them sound unwanted or a nuisance. Rather than saying, I have 4 homeless cats in my backyard, it evokes care and it's shared responsibility. We talk about predators. As soon as you hear predator, you think scary and dangerous. We can frame it in animals hunting to survive. It's natural, it's necessary. So the way we speak, it definitely projects the issue at hand, and how we think about it before we even start having a conversation is the way you present it. So small shifts in wording can completely change how people feel and act towards animals. We're all making these choices intentionally or not every time we talk about wildlife. Words that help versus words that hurt. Here's a couple of great examples that I had to share this evening. Choose language that supports wildlife, better language choices, animals hunting to survive instead of predators, like we said, kill or capture instead of harvest, live ecosystems instead of natural resources, homeless cats instead of stray cats, as we said, animals in conflict with human activity instead of nuisance wildlife. And language that really hurts when you think about it, we refer to some animals as pests. It instantly frames them as problems to eliminate. And then we talk about problem animals. It removes the empathy towards the being. Surplus population turns living beings into numbers, and to take or manage action, like taking down a population or so forth of animals, it hides the killing or suffering. So again, word choices are extremely important. And we can see how shifting even one word can make people more compassionate and engaged. And again, I go back to that homeless cat versus stray cat. It's an example I love to use. Lastly, here, why it matters and what's ahead, framing the future of coexistence. Some key points this evening, calling killing a harvest makes it feel routine. Animals hunting to survive are treated as problems. Words shape whose lives we see as valuable and whose we don't. This webinar will explore how language shapes public perception and policy, practical ways to speak and write that helps not harms animals. And we have a few great stories and examples and tips from our guest speakers. And remember, animals hunt to survive. Humans can choose words that make their lives count. And today we're going to learn how. I'm excited to have 2 great speakers with us this evening, Joshua Levin from Connecticut Votes from Animals and Nicole Rivard from Friends of Animals. And we're going to discuss the power of your voice, crafting testimony for animals in the environment. Joshua, thank you for joining us this evening. Joshua is the Legislative and Advocacy Manager at Connecticut Votes for Animals. Joshua focuses on public education, coalition building, and empowering both advocates and policymakers to advance pro-animal legislation. In this webinar, Joshua will review what framing is and the importance, some different writing styles to use when crafting public testimony, and the essential components of public testimony with some good examples from each. So Joshua, really excited to dive into this with our viewers this evening. I hand over the presentation to you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Jim. Thanks everybody for joining us tonight. I am super excited to discuss with you all tonight about the power that we all have, which is our voice. We all can help create change for the animals and for the environment in Connecticut. And so let's just dive right in here. On the agenda, we have 3 things: framing, what it is and why it's so important to understand, different writing styles that can be used when crafting public testimony, and of course, we'll be going over how to craft public testimony, including some key components and different ways to use them. But before we begin, I have to ask one thing from each and every one of you. That is, don't think of an elephant. Now, when I said that, what image popped into your head? I am going to go out on a limb here and say that it looks something like this. And I think I'm right. I'm confident I'm right, because the word elephant is a frame that conjures up the image of this giant plant-eating mammal with a big trunk and tusks. When I said the word elephant, it activated that frame in your minds and made you think of an elephant, even though I asked you not to think of one. And so this is what framing is. And a lot of what I'm going to be talking about tonight regarding framing comes from this incredible book, Don't Think of an Elephant by George Lakoff. So, framing. What is it? Frames are mental structures that shape the way we see the world. Or, more generally speaking, they're words, terms, and phrases that elicit certain responses. All thought is physical. We can only understand what our brains allow us to understand. We are only capable to think in ways that our brains are used to, and that's based on the neural pathways that have been forged through the years and years of our lives. To me, this conjures the mental image of a dog running in the same circle so much that it carves a path in the grass, and that's essentially what framing is. So when you hear a particular word, its frame is activated in your mind. Remember that elephant? The more a frame is activated, the stronger it gets. And so when we speak to someone with opposing views and we use their frames, we activate those frames, strengthening them and undermining our own. And even when you negate a frame, you activate that frame. Remember that elephant. So that's kind of the definition and the understanding of what frames are. And so here is an example of a frame, which is time equals currency. So the frame here is that time is a limited economic resource. Think of phrases like, that meeting cost me an hour, or invest your time wisely, spend your time elsewhere. I just bought myself some time. These are all phrases that activate the frame time equals currency. And this emphasizes productivity, efficiency, scarcity, feeling like you need to be urgent about something. And it minimizes the value of unproductive time, or time is experiential. So it makes you think, if time is money, then rest must look like indulgence. And even if that thinking is subconscious, this is what that frame conveys. This continues to persist because it aligns with today's society and work culture while still feeling practical. And it turns something that's abstract, like time, into something that's measurable and manageable. Because time is already associated with responsibility and discipline, framing time as currency quietly helps to moralize how people live their lives. So let's dissect that a bit. We're going to take the underlying fact for this frame, that all people have the same amount of hours in a day and must choose how to use them, and examine it through two different ways. The first, time is currency. So with that frame and that underlying fact, we end up getting the sentence, you must budget your time wisely so you don't end up wasting it on something frivolous. And this activates feeling like you need to be efficient and maximizing your time, really focusing on self-discipline. And it makes the listener unconsciously ask, is this the best return on my time? So now, with this same underlying fact that everyone has the same amount of time in a day and must choose how to use them, we're going to look at it through the frame of time as an experience. And with those two things, we end up getting the phrase, you must choose how you want to experience your limited hours each day. This activates feelings of meaning and personal relational fulfillment. And it makes the listener unconsciously ask themselves, how do I want this time in my life to feel? So you can see here that by using different words, we can elicit different feelings. So why does this matter, right? The currency frame versus the experiencing frame. It matters because frames are ideas and not slogans. Because the language activates frames, new language is required to create new frames and ultimately change someone's position on an issue. Thinking differently requires speaking differently. To reframe an issue is to access what we already believe unconsciously, making it conscious, and then repeating it until it becomes normal public discourse. The challenge here, when countering frames, is to counter them, strengthening our own without accidentally strengthening the opposition's frames. So let's look at this one more time, but with the example or with the frame of nature equals resource. Here, this frame is nature exists for human exploitation. And we can think of that through the phrases of natural resources, water supply, resource allocation, underutilized land. These terms here emphasize human control of the land, stewardship, planning and regulation, and it minimizes the intrinsic value that nature has, non-human agency, and the interdependence between humans and the environment. This continues to persist because it feels reasonable and calm, and unlike some other overtly exploitive language, this suggests care and foresight. People can feel responsible and entitled at the same time. And once nature is framed as infrastructure, damages only matter when they threaten supply and profits. Protection becomes maintenance and is only justified long enough to keep the system operational. So now, one more time, we're going to go through one fact, two frames. For this frame, nature equals resource, using the underlying fact, a forest provides clean water, wildlife habitat, and protection from flooding. So nature is a resource. With this underlying fact, we get protecting the forest ensures continued access to clean water, reduces flood damage, and supports valuable wildlife. This activates utility, human benefit, or cost benefit thinking. It makes the listener unconsciously ask, how much protection is enough to keep the benefits flowing? Now, with this underlying fact, and we take the frame nature as a community, we end up getting the forest is a living system that keeps water clean, shelters wildlife, and stabilizes the land that all life depends on. Makes the listener ask, how do we take care of something that we are a part of? This activates interdependence, relationship, and mutual benefit. So all words have intrinsic meaning, and they can be unique to the individual. Frames shape the goals that we seek, the plans that we make, the way that we act, and what each of us consider to be a good or bad outcome for our actions. To change a frame is to change all of this. And so that is by no means easy. But the more that we consider frames when we speak to each other, the more we can shift our focus and craft new frames that speak to the opposition's values and beliefs using words that don't stimulate their current frames. So really, when you boil it all down, reframing is social change. So moving on from there, we have writing styles. Here I have outlined 7 different writing styles, which is by no means an exhaustive list, but really just meant to provide an example for each of the more commonly used writing styles of public testimony. And each writing style comes with a small example, and they're all going to pertain to the issue of animals sold in pet stores to really underscore how different each writing style can be. So the first one we have here is informative. Informative writing style is used to communicate facts without taking a stance on the issue. And so we can see that here with the city ordinance would prohibit the sale of dogs, cats, and rabbits in pet shops. Proponents of the bill argue that the measure would reduce demand for animals bred in large-scale commercial breeding facilities and encourage adoption from shelters. Those opposing the bill believe that it would negatively impact pet stores' profit margins and increase the financial strain felt by store owners. And so you can see that this is just a straightforward explanation about the issue, and there's no position taken. Our next one here we have is persuasive, which is attempting to convince the reader to agree with us, commonly using anecdotal evidence to appeal to their emotions. By prohibiting the sale of dogs, cats, and rabbits in pet shops, the city can take a stand against inhumane breeding practices while giving animals a second chance at a loving home. Many families have been devastated after unknowingly buying a sick puppy, an experience that reveals the routine suffering hidden behind retail sales. Choosing adoption over pet sales replaces that harm with hope and reflects a commitment to compassion over exploitation. And so the main difference here between persuasive and argumentative is that with argumentative, we aren't using anecdotal evidence, we're using more facts and data to support our claim and invalidate the opposing side. So with this one, we see opponents claim pet sales bans hurt local businesses, but evidence shows limiting the sale of commercially bred pets does not reduce overall revenue and protects consumers. A Florida report found deceptive pet sales cost the state over $25 million annually, while areas with bans show pet stores thriving by shifting to services and adoption partnerships. This demonstrates that consumer protection policies can coexist with healthy commerce. And so ideally, you want more than just one source. But for the sake of not bombarding you all with this massive wall of text or a wall of text that's more massive than the one that's on your screen, I just wanted to simplify that a bit. For me, in my testimony crafting, argumentative is probably the most common writing style that I use. That's because in testimony, it's important to support your position and refute the oppositions as concisely as possible. And while this is my most commonly used writing style, it's by no means the only writing style that I use. And even in the same piece of testimony, I'll use several different writing styles. The next one here we have is narrative, which is just telling a story with characters typically navigating a sequence of events. And so with this one, we see Jenna walked into the shelter. When Jenna walked into the shelter, she wasn't planning to adopt. But after meeting a shy dog recently rescued from a puppy mill and seeing the sadness in those eyes, she realized how different one life could be if only they were given a second chance. Shortly thereafter, this pup, who was once confined to the same cramped kennel all his life, was on his way to his new home, brimming with excitement and anticipation. So here we're trying to convey a story that kind of tugs on those heartstrings a bit. And same kind of goes with descriptive, where we are painting a vivid picture using a lot of sensory detail. And so that comes out to something like the rows of wire cages were stacked one atop the other, leaving little room for the dogs to stand, let alone turn around. Water bowls were tipped or empty, fur matted, and paws covered in excrement pressed through metal floors. The constant shrieks of pain and despair, mixed with anxious, nervous barking, reverberated off the walls of the dim, unventilated room. So here I'm like really trying to elicit an emotional response, and whether that's sadness or anger or humor, it's something. And in this case, what I was trying to attempt to elicit was feelings of both sadness for the animal and anger at the system that allows this practice to continue. Second to last here, we have analytical. This is examining an issue using multiple factors to kind of see what their impact has been. So we get data from municipalities with pet shop sales bans indicate a correlation between the ordinances, increased shelter adoptions, and less impulse purchases. These findings suggest that the policy may change how people acquire pets rather than whether they acquire pets. Lastly, we have technical. This writing style is especially used to convey some complex information in the most succinct way possible. So for this one, I use the example of House Bill 5112 from the 2025 legislative session would have repealed existing language in Section 22-344 of the Connecticut General Statutes and substituted language that explicitly bans the sale of dogs, cats, and rabbits in pet stores effective October 1, 2025. So now, with that, let's transition over to crafting public testimony to get a few tips and see examples of these writing styles in work. So a few tips for both spoken and written. When it comes to spoken testimony, you can either present in person or virtually, but regardless, you must pre-register to speak. Once session starts and we start getting into the public hearing phase, session starts February 4th, so next week, next Wednesday. And the public hearing phase is typically a few weeks afterwards. Once that happens and once CBA is issuing action alerts for these public hearings, within that action alert, we will provide a step-by-step guidance on how to register to speak. It is a pretty straightforward process, though. You just go to the CJ website and find the public hearing agenda for the committee that the bill you're interested in has been raised in. But typically, we will just hyperlink register to speak or register or click here to submit testimony. When you're presenting your testimony in person or virtually, it can be 3 minutes max, which is roughly between 300 and 500 words, just depending upon how long you speak, or excuse me, how fast you speak. And it's really important to practice. Not only will practicing make you feel more confident, it will also help ensure that you hit your key points with the proper cadence and enunciation and emphasis. And it's also okay to not know everything. No one knows everything about the topic. And so if you get asked a question, which all legislators have the option to do so once you are done presenting your testimony, and you don't know the answer to that question, it is fine with just saying something like, sorry, I don't have that information on hand at the moment. I will get that to you following this public hearing. And that's also a good opportunity to establish rapport with that legislator. You can then reach out to them afterwards individually and provide them with the research of the data. And there you go. You just, established a communication with the legislator that you might be able to build off of. For written testimony, the best practice here is to submit prior to the public hearing, but you can submit it afterwards. And it's best to think of written testimony as an expanded version of your spoken testimony, even if you don't intend on going and speaking it. And just because it can be expanded and it can be longer doesn't mean that legislators are going to read all of it. Oftentimes when you are presenting your testimony in person or virtually, the legislators will search for your submitted written testimony and follow along because they know that typically what you're saying is a condensed version of your written testimony. So if you do plan on speaking, you always want to submit written testimony in conjunction with that. And last point for both spoken and written, you never want to bury the lead. Don't bury the lead. If there is one thing that you all can take from tonight, it's that don't bury the lead. When you are crafting testimony, speaking it or writing it, you want to state your position on the issue within the first few lines, if not the first line. So there are 5 essential components to crafting public testimony. We have your formal opening. You introduce yourself, explain your values, provide supporting facts and data, And finally, conclude with an ask and appreciation. So your formal opening, that is your greeting and your thanks appreciation for the opportunity to speak. They're going to look very similar between spoken and written. Really, you're just saying, hello, co-chairs and committee members. Thank you for the opportunity to provide public testimony on this important issue. You can also include the co-chairs' names. You don't want to list every single member, but certainly the co-chairs are fine. For number two, introducing yourself, just state your name, your occupation, and the organization you're representing. You don't, if you're not representing an organization, you could state the town that you live in, which can be helpful if you are a constituent of one of the committee members. That may make their ears perk up a bit and they might listen to you a little bit more in depth. And so this looks very similar as well. With your spoken testimony, you're just going to state, my name is Joshua Levin, Legislative Advocacy Manager for Connecticut Votes for Animals. For written testimony, you can just state who you are, your occupation, and your organization. And you can just put that right at the top of the testimony and you'll see what that looks like in just a moment. Number three, explain your values, probably the most important component of testimony. You want to explicitly state your position, whether for or against this bill or this issue. And so for written testimony, you want to insert it right at the top. Say, I am in support of House Bill 6915, or I'm in opposition to House Bill 5134. And then in addition to that, you also want to include the spoken testimony points within your written testimony. Those are going to be the same. So you're going to say very clearly, first sentence, Connecticut must ban the use and sale of second-generation anticoagulant rodenticides. Or more simply, I am strongly opposed to House Bill 7231. For number four, supporting facts and data, they're both going to look the same. This is substantiating evidence to support your position. For spoken testimony, you may try to elicit more of an emotional response by using the narrative or descriptive writing styles. And I'll get to that in just a moment with my first testimony example. But really, spoken or written, same thing. Rodent birth control studies indicate up to a 97% reduction in rodent populations, and just make sure you cite your sources. Finally, number five, conclude with an ask and express your gratitude. So spoken, written, both the same. And then you always just want to end with something along the lines of, thank you for your time and consideration on this important issue. So now, what does this look like altogether? Here, I provided an outline where you can go one by one. Here is your formal opening. Here is where you introduce yourself. The 1 through 5 essential components are not in any particular order. You can see here that number 2, introduce yourself, is the very first line, and the formal opening was right below. You'd also, when it comes to your spoken testimony, you don't need this fancy letterhead or the first 2 lines here. You can make the font 18 point, 24 point, just so you can be able to read it when you're up there speaking. But when it comes to written testimony, you definitely want to make it look nice and always want to submit that in conjunction with your spoken testimony. So here are just some more, an excerpt of some of the explanation of my values. And you'll see that the first sentence here, Connecticut must ban the use and sale of second-generation anticoagulant rodenticides. So I explicitly state within my first sentence how I want this committee to act. And this example here is kind of a merger of both spoken and written. The top few lines, the date, the testimony of, and in support of, don't need to be included in your spoken testimony, but you surely want to include that in your written. I just wanted to combine them so that we can get a sense of both written and spoken in one example. Here are some of my supporting facts and data. And with this one, you can see how, we'll get to that in just a second. For number 5, this is just the conclusion with an ask of Connecticut should lead by example and ban the use and sale of SGARs, and then thanking them for their time and consideration. Here you see this second paragraph here is where I tried to hone in on the descriptive and narrative writing style. So I said the A in SGAR stands for anticoagulant. That means that this poison causes all who consume it to slowly bleed out from the inside. The pain felt by those suffering from internal bleeding is nothing short of debilitating. A brain bleed causes excruciating, blinding headaches. It is described as a migraine amplified 100-fold. Other symptoms, such as dizziness, disorientation, increased heart rate, panic-ridden anxiety, feeling like you're freezing, and hearing a ringing in your ears, only compounds the agony. And so there, I tried my best to elicit an emotional response because, one, I'm in person, and I'm trying to tug on those heartstrings a bit. And also just because I vehemently believe that nobody, regardless of what type of creature you are, should be subjected to such a barbaric form of death. And so I provided a few more examples here, really for your own personal edification, because everybody that registered for this webinar is going to get this slide deck, so you guys can peruse this as you're at your own leisure. I just wanted to provide you all with an array of example testimonies so that you have something to pull from when you craft your own testimony. And here you can see that we have arrows pointing to, each component. This testimony was submitted in opposition to Senate Bill 1523, an act concerning bear hunting. This here was in opposition to House Bill 7231, and this is a good example that your testimony does not need to be this long 2, 3, 4-page piece of testimony. It can just be a few sentences. I've even seen a few that are just a few paragraphs to literally just one sentence. So it really, length doesn't matter. It's more quality. Here we have testimony in support of House Bill 5112, an act prohibiting pet stores from purchasing or procuring dogs, cats, and rabbits. And the final example testimony that I provided was the one that we submitted in opposition to House Bill 5134, which was the bill looking to expand the rabbit meat processing in the state. And so that's all I have for you guys tonight. And as I wrap up, I just want you to remember, don't think of an elephant, right? Framing is key to winning arguments and making people feel what you want them to feel rather than what they already believe. So thank you all so much for listening in on my portion of tonight's webinar. And with that, I will pass it back to Jim. Thank you, guys.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Joshua. Some great information. Great that folks will have this. As you said, this video will be sent out. Folks can pause on these different screens, look at how you've dissected your testimony. Some wonderful examples. So thank you again, Joshua. Next up, I'm excited to have Nicole Rivard joining us here for our webinar, This Animal. Nicole is the Media and Government Relations Manager for Friends of Animals. Nicole will present information on how words impact animal welfare organizations and offer key insights and facts that shed light on the power of words and testimony. She'll also place this problem in a broader context by discussing how you shape your words and presentations can help, not hurt animals, the animal and in the ecosystems you want to protect. Nicole, thanks so much for joining us again and partnering with us and Friends of Animals. I hand over the presentation to you, and I look forward to hearing all of your great examples. And I know you've been on the front lines many times, so I'm sure you have a lot to share with us this evening.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. We know you can be anywhere you want to be on a Wednesday night. So it's an honor for me to be here on behalf of Friends of Animals. And I wanted to begin by sharing this photo of me testifying last year. And you can see I'm smiling, but on the inside, I'm really, really nervous. And even right now, my heart's beating a little bit fast. But I wasn't as nervous as my first time testifying on behalf of Friends of Animals at a public hearing for the Big Five African Trophies Act back in 2016. When those 3 minutes were over, and after I got asked some questions by members of the Environment Committee, I went and I sobbed in my car because I wasn't sure I answered the legislators on the Environment Committee well enough. And don't worry, this story has a happy ending. We did eventually get that bill banning the sale of the trophies of African lions, leopards, rhinos, elephants, and giraffes signed by the governor. And in 2023, we got a bill protecting horseshoe crabs passed. The moral of the story is it's okay to be a little nervous. And more importantly, if I can do this, you can. And nothing's more rewarding than helping to get a bill across the finish line. And by the way, what I've learned is it's okay to respond to a legislator, that you will get the information they are asking about to them after the hearing. And I wanted to give you the best advice tonight. So I asked for a little help from legislators on the Environment Committee. I asked them what they feel makes compelling testimony, and then I'm going to be sharing that alongside FOA's experiences. So here you can see what legislators want, tip number 1. And again, Joshua mentioned this. You only have 3 minutes, so don't start off by addressing every chair, vice chair, ranking member. Just provide your name, title, organization, and the town you live. You don't have to recite your whole resume. And again, I'm just underscoring what Joshua already mentioned. Just state your objective immediately. I want or don't want Bill X. Here's why. So this is a real life example. When FOA was working on the Big Five African Trophies Act, which actually passed in 2021, the why was Connecticut residents did not have clean hands when it came to pushing these species closer to extinction. And we provided evidence that the state was actually supplying customers to this morally bankrupt and economically useless trophy hunting industry. That's what we called it because that's what it is. And we used information we got from a Freedom of Information Act request. We told legislators that from 2005 to 2015, 59 trophy hunting permits were issued to Connecticut residents by U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service so people could hunt and kill leopards for their trophies. 6 permits were provided to Connecticut residents to kill African elephants in Botswana, Tanzania, and Zimbabwe. And from 2005 to 2016, Connecticut residents killed 39 lions and 1 giraffe and imported their trophies. We even dug in further. We found out that the Connecticut communities issued the most permits were Greenwich, North Haven, Norwalk, Berlin, Stamford, Westport, Weston, Easton, Southington, and Middletown. And needless to say, that got legislators' attention. It's still mind-blowing to me now when I look back at that time, just that Connecticut residents are going over it and contributing to that industry. So now I'm going to talk about the why when we were working on making it illegal for people to kill horseshoe crabs for bait in Connecticut, and that piece of legislation passed in 2023. So the why was that Connecticut's quota for chopping up horseshoe crabs to bait eel and whelk pots was a staggering 48,689 crabs each summer, and that was despite the fact that horseshoe crabs were already functionally extinct in Long Island Sound, and that means they no longer play an effective role in their ecosystem. So we had to make it clear that Connecticut needed to stop the reckless killing of horseshoe crabs for bait, simply so people could eat their smoked eel and conch fritters. And we revealed that the Atlantic Marine Fisheries Commission downgraded the stocks of horseshoe crabs in the New York region, which actually includes Connecticut and the Long Island Sound, from neutral to poor in 2019. And we also pointed out to them that local bans were already in effect in Westbrook, West Haven, Milford, and Stratford. So there was already some momentum to protect Connecticut's horseshoe crabs. So another real life example related to the why, we're still working to ban the sale and use of second generation anticoagulant rodenticides in Connecticut. Josh just touched upon this a little bit. So the why is raptors and mammals in Connecticut are under siege from these powerful, long-lasting poisons making their way up the food chain. And as Josh mentioned, the anticoagulants work by preventing blood from clotting. So the animals are dying a slow, agonizing death from internal bleeding after consuming poison rodents who've taken the bait from those ubiquitous black boxes you see outside buildings all over the place. At Friends of Animals, we believe this is the definition of animal cruelty. And so we explicitly tell legislators who don't support this legislation that they do support indiscriminate animal cruelty. So legislators do love data and proof that there is an issue. So luckily, we are friends with and allies with a place called Hope Birds of Prey Rehab Center in Killingsworth. And we were able to talk about how they completed 101 tests on killed birds and animals at the time, of the public hearing, with 78 being positive for eschars, including 5 bald eagles, 7 great horned owls, an endangered barn owl, and 56 hawks. And they continue to do testing, and the numbers are growing. We also shared that Wildlife in Crisis in Weston, which is the largest wildlife rehab center in the state, estimate that at least 100 birds of prey and 40 foxes die in their care from eschars annually. So I just want to point out, like Josh, while you only have 3 minutes to speak, your written testimony can be longer, and it's a good place to provide some of this compelling data. One thing we did last year, we learned what the poison monger companies, the pest control companies, were saying to legislators. So we made a document called Myths and Truths and provided a rebuttal to all of the lies they were spreading in the written testimony that we submitted. Of course, we couldn't fit that into our 3 minutes, but it was a separate document that we were able to submit electronically. And, we felt like that gave us an edge over the pest control companies, that we were able to have an opportunity to rebut what they were telling the legislators. So another piece of advice, direct from the horse's mouth, direct from the legislators, is to be original. So depending on your public hearing draw number, there could be hundreds of people signed up for testimony. Legislators might be in the room multiple hours hearing the same testimony all day long. So it's really incumbent to try and make yours unique and try not to say the same things that have been said before you. And you will have an opportunity to hear people go before you. And I've been in the room literally rewriting my testimony while I'm sitting there, so I can focus on something that the others didn't bring up in their testimony. And one tip I would personally give is legislators seem to always be interested in whether or not other states have passed certain legislation. I think, it's more challenging for the states to be the first state to do something. So, and they also want to know if this legislation passed in another state, has it had a positive impact or not? So I think it's important to be the one to know what other states are doing. The next tip from legislators is to use personal accounts or leverage what's in the news. So before we started working on the Big Five African Trophies Act, I'm sure many of you know this story. Cecil, a lion who happened to be one of the top tourist attractions in Zimbabwe, had been lured out of a national park by a U.S. trophy hunter, shot with an arrow to avoid detection, suffered for more than 40 hours before being killed with a rifle shot, and had his collar removed illegally to hide his death. So we use that in our testimony to show the corruption of the industry and to show that U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, while they're giving out these trophy hunting permits, they can't regulate what's happening abroad. It's just simply impossible. And then another example, while we're working on legislation to ban the sale and use of second generation anticoagulant rodenticides, in New York for over a year, Flacco, a Eurasian eagle owl, had survived outside of Central Park Zoo after his enclosure was vandalized and he was let out. He was like a celebrity in New York City, and Friends of Animals is a national organization. So, and we have some staff in New York. So we were following Flacco's escapades and journey. And then he ultimately died from a window collision, but the well-loved owl was also found to be carrying lethal levels of rodenticide, which probably affected his ability to fly, which is probably why he collided with a window and died. So we've shared that story in our testimony and just in speaking with legislators here in Connecticut to change hearts and minds in our own state. So these are bills that we testified in support of, but you might find yourself testifying against bills to make sure they don't pass. For instance, we are continuously fighting legislation since 2014, I think, that would make it legal to hunt black bears in Connecticut. And when it comes to protecting black bears, we can't emphasize enough that words matter. So we work closely with BearWise. It's a national program made up of wildlife biologists dedicated to helping people live more responsibly with bears. And they've actually published a bear communication guide. If anyone's interested in it, you can email me and I can send it to you. Because they know that when you're providing testimony, you have the power to help everyone understand how and why people, humans, cause most human bear interactions. And even more importantly, how living to these, according to the BearWise recommendations, you can actually prevent the interactions. So in their communication guide, they talk about terms to avoid when you're talking about bears with legislators or in your written testimony: bear problems, problem bear, nuisance bear, conflict bear. These terms position the bear as the cause of the issue and diminish the value of bears. Instead, you can say human-caused conflicts with bears, encounters or interactions with bears, or simply incidents involving bears and people, pets, and property. And also, if you hear someone who's, a hunting apologist or pro-hunting bears, and they refer to an attack that they read about in the media or something to justify a hunt, it's our job to remind legislators that attack should never be used to describe an instinctive defensive response by the bear. So that means a bear that's suddenly surprised by someone or harassed or cornered by someone's dog or is defending food or cubs or itself. It may fight back against what it perceives as a threat. The attack word itself is emotionally charged and inherently implies aggression, and that's simply not fair. So this next slide, I'm not going to read it word for word because it's a lot of words, but I'm glad you'll have it after this is over. It's actual testimony that we submitted last year opposing a bear hunt. And at Friends of Animals, it's maddening how media's coverage of bears tends to be heavy on fear-mongering, probably to sell papers, and very light on facts and teaching opportunities. So we always, we submit a lot of op-eds, but we also take the opportunity to address this in our testimony. And so one of the things we did was, you've probably seen headlines, oh, record-breaking home entries every year. And so we decided to file a Freedom of Information Act request to get the details of these home entries. And, one example, there was 39 between April and June 30th, 2024. And, the majority were preventable. An example here is a Falls Village resident found a black bear in her kitchen. The opportunistic bear grabbed some chicken and strolled out the magnetic screen door, where it ate before sauntering off into the woods. And the resident had said in the report that she had recognized the bear because it had previously helped itself to fruit from her 3 dozen fruit trees. So, the lesson here is magnetic screen doors won't keep bears out, and bears can smell food from miles away. We also feel like it's important to rebut, Deep's report every year that there's, a number of human bear conflicts, but in most of these cases, the conflicts are not with humans; they're with bird feeders, trash, and livestock. And you can see from 2023 of the conflicts, 653 involved bird feeders, 1,117 involved trash cans, and 210 involved livestock or beehives. So, clearly hunting is not the answer. It's helping people and communities get bear-resistant trash cans and electric fencing around chickens and beehives. And we would like to see that achieved through statewide legislation. So whether you're talking about bears or pets or rodenticides, the last few pieces of advice I got were speak with respect, from experience, and from the heart. And I was thinking about how I've been up in Hartford during, so many public hearings, and what resonates with legislators the most are kids and teenagers. And I think it's because they have such an impact on legislators because they're so good at doing all of those things. They don't seem to be nervous at all. They don't get in their heads like we do. And also, it's important if you can, if you're in person, to make eye contact, pause, and have a conversation with the legislators. Um, they also said you can approach them in the hallway before or after the public hearing, respectfully, of course. Um, and those conversations, I would say, help to build the relationships with the legislators. And it's good to offer to them to be a resource throughout the entire session. You know, they have so much on their plate, they have so many bills and issues to consider and to learn about. And so if you can be a constant resource, like at their fingertips when they need it, I think that goes a long way. If you can be the expert for them, because they can't be an expert on everything. And I guess, like Josh said, for me, if you remember one thing tonight, if a bill doesn't pass, there's always next year, and not to give up. Um, I just learned recently that on average, it takes 3 sessions to pass a bill. So don't get discouraged, keep going, and be resilient like the wildlife you are trying to protect. Thank you.
That's great advice, Nicole. Thank you so much. Certainly agree with everything you said this evening, and you shared some great examples of what it's like, being on the front lines. And certainly I've had those instances myself where you're actually listening to testimony going before you, and the person before you is saying everything you wanted to say. So you're quickly trying to adjust your things, your statements on the fly and whatnot, because you want to keep their attention. You see the legislators sometimes glaze over after they've listened to the 20th or 30th speaker and so forth too. So great advice from both Joshua and Nicole. Make yours unique as you can, have those facts, have the data that supports, and so forth. So wonderful presentation. I do want to thank Nicole and Joshua, Connecticut Votes for Animals and Friends of Animals this evening. I also want to thank the Community Foundation of Eastern Connecticut, today's educational webinar sponsor. I'm going to take a look here for some Q&A, so I ask the panel members to go ahead and join me back on screen. We do have a couple questions here so far. We have a couple minutes here to share. One of the questions coming in, Eileen, thank you for I listened to a Connecticut public hearing about the rodenticide use and exchange between a Connecticut legislator and a pesticide rep sounded rehearsed and planned to me. They were both supporting the use of these poisons. In my public testimony followed an exchange like this. Should I call it out? Um, Certainly, I looked to Nicole for some of her advice on this too. My personal advice on this, and I've had this happen. You hear a lot of conversations going on when you're in the hallway at the LOB or the Capitol. You hear legislators talking with all their constituents and so forth. I don't think I'd call out it publicly, and my approach would be more to try and then corner that legislator, or have a conversation in the hallway afterward, and say, hey, I overheard this piece of information. I want to share kind of these facts with you. And again, here's your opportunity, a couple minutes in front of that legislator, to see if you can change his or her mind, and also maybe find out why they think or why they're supporting it, because maybe there's a missing piece of education there, and that's your opportunity to kind of share that extra piece of information. And I've had many legislators then turn to me and say, you know what, I didn't think of it that way, or I didn't think of it from that angle, or understand it fully. So again, I look more to, rather than calling out publicly, have that conversation, see if you can educate, and of course I didn't hear the exact conversation or exactly what you heard, so I'm just kind of going on my instincts here for you. But excellent question. Eileen, thoughts on that? Nicole, Joshua, have you run into similar situations with listening to conversations and then?
Luckily, no similar situations, but I do not doubt that that took place. I also would advise against calling out. I don't think that anybody's opinion is changed when they're called out or they feel attacked. I think if anything, if you're sitting there trying to craft your testimony and trying to make it a more unique piece, maybe you can talk about the strong relationship between the state and these pest management companies. But really, if that was a rehearsed convo, which I do believe that it was, then that's probably a legislator that no words that you say are really going to be able to convince otherwise. So really, I would just try to stick to more your core argument that you had previously. Yeah, that's my 2 cents on that.
Excellent. That's some great
Yeah, I was
advice.
just going to add to, like, maybe it's clearly in that situation, it sounds like the legislator and that pest management company have a relationship. So it couldn't hurt for you to ask for a meeting with that legislator and try to develop your own relationship. I've heard that before from legislators that they're like, why should we believe you? Because we're hearing the exact opposite from so and so. And so I think you just have to keep I think you just have to keep your argument in the forefront. And even if you think it's a legislator, that you're never going to change their mind, like I would keep trying. Because I know in California that they passed legislation that banned the sale and use of escars. And I think the legislator who became the champion was like the person who was against it at first, because we are friendly with the one of the groups that has been spearheading that effort. And I remember that's what she told me. Like, so she turned him.
Right, right. Absolutely. Good advice. Good advice. Here we go. Moving on here. Christine Cummings has a question here. Christine, thanks for joining us. Christine is the director of a place called Hope, one of our partners. Please take a moment to watch our great presentation with Joshua, Nicole, Christine, myself, all of us on SGARs, the new legislation, the ban, how it does, it's a shortfall in legislation, and so forth. So, Christine, a shout out for our video for folks to watch that. This evening, Christine's telling us she's thrilled to have listened tonight and really appreciate the emphasis on avoiding terms we commonly refer to that only perpetuate a negative perception of animals and situations. Absolutely. I appreciate this from my own personal journey regarding rodents as nuisance or pest animals. It's not their fault, as we understand that they are only interested in survival. Humans are an easy source of comfort when it comes to harborage. I will go forward with better communication skills because of this. Thanks, Christine. You're great. You're a great communicator already, and certainly on the front lines of this fight against SGR. So keep up the great work. Thanks for joining us tonight. Your inputs are so valuable. Another member here, we've got our neighborhood dog walker. How long will the recording be up? Once we have the recording out, everybody tonight will get the recorded video sent to them. And a link to the video library, and we keep them up on our website. They will stay there indefinitely. It's part of our video library, so the link will stay active. You can continue to share this. You can go back to this information, refer it, forward it, and all of that. So great question. Laura's got a question here. Can group approach the hearings strategically where different people sharing testimony organize themselves from focus on different talking points so everyone brings something new to the legislator? Absolutely. I've done this in higher education, I'll be honest with you, where you've got a multi-tiered issue, you've got different alternatives. You can register. It doesn't have to be just one person from one organization. When there's a public hearing, multiple people from the same organization can register. You're a resident, you're an employee here in Connecticut, so that's what public hearings are for. So if you could do a concerted effort and absolutely have 4 or 5 major topics coming from your organization, or pieces of information or data where it's all a little bit different, unique, but all supporting the same end result. A concerted effort, in my mind, I've used it, I've been part of it. It works very strategically. It also keeps the legislators from glossing over, in my experience, because again, each speaker is talking about something a little bit differently. So you're keeping the content not the same testimony over and over again. So great question, Nicole. Joshua, anything to add on that?
I was just going to mention that we're all part of the Connecticut Coalition to Protect Black Bears. And in fact, we have kind of done that ahead of time and split up the responsibility in terms of covering important points when we've been, trying to defeat a black bear hunt, which we have for so many years. So it seems to be working.
Teamwork,
Yep.
teamwork, absolutely.
Yeah, I
Joshua?
agree. And Laura just asked a follow-up question. She said, "Do the organizations reach out to people asking them to appear?" And yes, organizations do. And CBA is actually in the process of getting that going as well. So if you're not a member already of CBA, you can go to ctvotesforanimals.org and click join. And that is like our volunteer group where, as public hearings are announced, we'll let our volunteer group know that, like, hey, there is a public hearing on this date. Here are talking points to craft your own testimony. Come join us at the legislative office building at on this day at this time, and we can all present together. So surely there's like the two routes of, or three routes really: individually, organizations, a bunch of organizations representing, or organizations and people.
Absolutely, absolutely. Great advice. Thank you, Joshua, for answering that. Anita has a question here, and I want this one. I'm going to jump right into. Can these pest control companies use any other deterrents? How can we suggest another remedy that they could actually use that they don't perceive or destroy their business? So, Anita, wonderful question. This is part of our presentation. If you watch the SGAR 2.0 video with Christine, Nicole, Joshua, myself, that literally was last month, I believe we recorded that one with the new 25 legislation. We go into this and we explain that we're not trying to take away anybody's jobs. There are birth control pellets that can be used instead of these poison SGAR pellets. They do not cross the food stream. They do not kill the hawks, the owls. They have to be administered on the same type business model so that you can change the product in the black box. And instead of visiting the customer and invoicing them once a month to put the poisons in the box, you can put the birth control pellets in the box and stop the use of the poison, still have the profit service model that these companies are using. We're not looking to take away any jobs. We're saying stop using the poisons. And as Christine always says, a poison is a poison. There are no good poisons. We need to stop using them in Connecticut. California's done this several years ago now. How many Connecticut's can fit inside California? And also, California is a season and climate where the rodents can reproduce year round. They don't have the winters like we do, and they're not having massive infestations. They're not using the poisons. We have pilots going on. The video will go into pilots at Bushnell Park here in Connecticut, other organizations where we're doing that here locally, working with Newtown to potentially look at them putting in local ordinances to stop the use on their public property, around public buildings and so forth. So we are coming together in Connecticut on this issue, Christine. We're behind you. We're here for our wildlife and get the poisons. In the video, you will learn all about the scientific approach of the poisons, the alternatives. So Anita, great question. Please watch that video and share it. It's available on our website underneath our educational library. Let me go on here. I don't want to miss anybody else's questions. Let's see. Do the organizations reach? Oh, we already answered that one for Laura. Laura said, "Thank you, friendly neighborhood. This was super informative. Glad I joined the Zoom. Are there any other ways to reach out to any of all of us that can help with any questions? I have asked the city of New Haven to join the Humane Commission, and would like to do as much as can to make a difference. Yes, you can absolutely reach out to join. I say join our organization, get our newsletter, join CVA's organization, get their newsletter. They put out the legislative alerts. Nicole, Friends of Animals, has a newsletter as well. The more organizations that you join and that can give you information for what's going on here in Connecticut. As you can see this evening, we are aligned. I think more than ever, the organizations are aligning in Connecticut because we understand that we're more powerful together than we are as individuals. And when you look at this landscape and the issues going on here in Connecticut, a lot of them are very similar, and we're all fighting in the same direction here. So tonight was really about finding your voice, how your voice matters, how to use words to not harm animals and protect animals, and how to craft legislation and have that academic debate or that good debate. And I go back to what I first said when we first started, folks. Understand the opposition side. Understand that sometimes you'll find those common threads where we already agree on 80% of this issue. There's only 20% we don't agree upon. And is there an educational component that they don't understand? Or is it something you will learn having that conversation with them too? Go into it with an open mind. If everybody does that, you really can come out on the better side for animals, for the environment, for our ecosystems here in Connecticut. So thank you for joining us, Joshua and Nicole. Anything to add as we wrap up this evening? And I want to thank all of our viewers. We had upwards of 100 folks registered, and this will go out on social media. Like I said, it will go out a direct link to all of you registered this evening, as well as on our website. So this video will reach thousands of residents in Connecticut. So thank you again, Joshua and Nicole. Your inputs have been so valuable.
course, happy. I just wanted to plug my email in case anybody wanted to reach out because I realized I didn't include that in my slides. But my email is my first name Joshua, last first initial L at ctvotesforanimals.org. So our friendly neighborhood dog walker. If you want to reach out so that we can chat and we can ask any of your questions, please.
I can share mine too in case anyone wants that bear communication guide. So mine is N Rivard, NRIVARD at friendsofAnimals.org.
Excellent. And folks know how to reach CFA. Jump on our website, info at ctforanimals.org. And you can find that direct link on our website as well. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Thanks for taking the time to really learn the power of your voice to help animals. Take care, everyone.